if they had walked up to her and shot her, she wouldn't have suffered the pain that she suffered in this case.
Judge, consider all of it inflammatory. Matter of law is appropriate.
Objection is overruled.
Thank you, Your Honor. 5 hours and 42 minutes of suffering. You see the blisters on her legs, the burn marks from her coming in contact with other parts of that car that was also rose to the level of 118 degrees or 135. She was burned externally and internally. What do you call it? Well, I'll tell you that if you're sitting around talking to your family members or your friends and you're describing this situation to them, you may not talk in terms of legal anything. But I think a good way to describe this is torture. It was torture. Before Larry and Rita, after Larry and Rita. Not the Larry and Rita that these other people didn't know. The Larry and Rita that were high on meth. And these bruises and these blisters that Dr. Vitalis described, torture. And you don't accidentally torture somebody. You treat them with such a lack of disregard for their human life that they die because of the torture. And that's what happened in this case. In the real world, you're talking to fans and family, and you're describing all of this. You might use the word torture. But in this courtroom today, they ask you to use the word murder.
Okay, so prosecution will get another whack at this, but wrapped up their primary closing argument, in this case against Rita Pangalangan and Larry King. Hey, with me still, Catherine Lizardo. She is a trial attorney in the Dallas-Fort Worth area. And joining us, Joe Richardson, civil rights attorney. Joe, good to have you along. Catherine, thanks for sticking around. So, Joe, very emotional case here. Very difficult to engender any sympathy for these defendants. What do you do with this case if you're representing either defendant?
Pray. Now, actually, what I might say, right, is that as pertains to the gentleman, right, he doesn't have all of the previous issues that she does in terms of child neglect and things like that. I would try to suggest that this is really all her. Now, that being said, he's got some difficulty here because of the length of time that she was left, that child was left in that car. I mean, it's at least 4 or 5 hours. And there's no good excuse for it. They come back out after an hour, go back away for 3 hours, and that contradicts the story that they told. So you've got some problems there. And, you know, somehow you've got to, you know, beg on the mercy of the court almost. Just the whole idea that perhaps this is something that was very, very unfortunate that anyone could have potentially done. Clearly a mistake, but something that doesn't rise to the level that makes it as severe as what the prosecution is going for. Because I think that's all they can hope for, is get like a lesser charge and not have the hammer come down on them quite as much. But my sense is it's going to come down.
Yeah, I think that the intent issue, if they follow the law, I think it's hard to find the intent issue for murder. I think they might want to, and they may get there. We'll never know how it quite works, but I think they really don't have it in this case, in the absence of some evidence that this woman was just over the burden of taking care of a special needs child, that over the last couple of years she was complaining to people. There were many opportunities for her to mistreat the child. I don't know that that is in front of this jury, so I think it's tough to get there traditionally, but it could happen. So let me ask you this, Catherine. I kind of look at Larry King as a bystander. You know, it's kind of an exaggeration of a bystander rule where you don't have any legal duty, you don't have any obligation to do anything. Now, on a human level, that's despicable, but on a legal level, why does he have any obligation to do anything?
Well, on a legal level, I'd argue, if I was the prosecution, that the car was parked in front of his property, and he was with Rita Pangalangan at that time, and that's why there's that conspiracy charge against both of them, that they conspired to quote unquote torture the child, is what we heard the prosecution saying during his closing argument, that you don't unintentionally torture a child. Especially we see there that they put the child, he's the one who put the child in the car, and then they left them there. And he's the one who called 911 and actually said, I'm turning on the car, or he said turn off, because he wants to show that the car was on. But really, he wasn't obviously too high to cover his tracks after the fact that he found out she was dead.
Okay, I'll give you that. That's not a bad point. You know, at a certain point, he does something proactive, whether it was part of the cover-up or not. So that could drag him back in and create a duty that he may not have originally had. Okay, let's go back into court now, continuing the closing arguments. Now, the first of the defendants, the man we've just been talking about, Larry King, his attorney John Loy, talking to the jury here.
Solicitor, in his comments to you, said a bunch of stuff, and some of it I agree with, and some of it I don't. I'd like to remind you at the outset that a moment ago, in the midst of his remarks, what he said was, and I wrote it down, they may have thought that the air conditioner was on. That's what he said. I will tell you right now, when you have heard the judge explain the law in this case, and you apply it to the facts that you've heard here, that sentence alone means the murder goes out the window. We'll talk about murder in a minute, but please, if you think nothing else about that opening remark, remember that the solicitor has conceded to you that Mr. King may well have thought that the air conditioner was on in that car. Now, ladies and gentlemen, I'm here on behalf of Mr. King. My remarks to you were addressed solely as relates to Mr. King. Ms. Pangalanan has a really good attorney, smart guy. He's going to address you soon as relates to her. So again, understand, I'm not talking about the two of them. I'm talking about Mr. King. Another thing that the solicitor pointed out in his opening remarks that I agree with was he said, well, this child was totally dependent upon Rita. And he said it over and over, and it's because it's true. This was a child who was always going to be dependent on her mother, and her mother was responsible for her, her mother had to care for her, her mother may well have tried to do the best she could or not. I'm not talking about her, but I'm talking about the child who was completely in her custody. There's no evidence before you that Mr. King was this child's father, Mr. King had adopted this child, that Mr. King and Miss Rita were married, and he was some sort of step-parent. He was dating her mom. It doesn't create some sort of legal bond between them or create duties that he has to do. This child is in the care of her mother, and he's visiting with her mother on that particular day. Ladies and gentlemen, when y'all return to the jury, when the judge is charged you on the law and suggests or instructed that you commence or begin your deliberations, it may be that if y'all read Mr. King's indictments first, that you simply say, looking at the laws the judge gives it to you, Larry is not guilty of the crime. At least he's not guilty of any one of these crimes that alleged in this indictment. Larry didn't kill anybody. He didn't commit a murder. He didn't cause great bodily injury to anybody. And I'll talk about the conspiracy court. There's going to be no evidence to support that. It may be that at the outset you say, I understand why the state's outraged. This never should have happened the way that it did. But Mr. King didn't kill him. If that's the case, I don't know if we have a full person. But if that's the case, whoever the full person is on the jury, you're fully entitled to this right for not guilty. Set those indictments aside and move on with whatever other business y'all have. But in the event that one or more of you feel like his circumstantial situation merits further discussion in the jury room or deliberation. I need to talk to you about a few more things, okay? First of all, the judge is going to tell you soon that every person charged with a crime is presumed innocent of any wrongdoing. And I know somebody wrote a book and they made a movie called Presumed Innocent and stuff like that, but it's an absolutely critical term of law when used in court here today. And what it means is the defendant, although he chose to testify, has absolutely nothing to prove during the course of the prosecution or during the course of his defense. And you have a right to remain silent, and that right cannot be used against you if you choose to exercise it. It's because of the presumption of innocence. It doesn't mean you go wait and see. Maybe, maybe not. Show me what you got. It means at the outset of the trial, even at this point, you look at that paper and you say, he's innocent. It's critical. And then you look at this statement and you say, okay, Mr. Solicitor, your office brought the indictment, your office called the case, your office summons for the court, summons here to try the case that you scheduled. Prove to me that the defendant is guilty of the crimes in this indictment or in these indictments. And for the state to prevail, to meet that burden, what it means is they have to prove every element, ingredient, value. They have to prove every element of the crimes that are alleged within the indictment. They have to prove them beyond a reasonable doubt. So this isn't civil court. I don't know if you've done that. Sometimes you see the statute, lady justice, when she's holding the scales and it tips a little. In civil court, it's preponderance of the evidence. It tips one way or the other, that side of things. It's not that way here. Today it's proof beyond a reasonable doubt. And the state called it murder indictment against Mr. King, alleging that he had murdered a child. It means they make you promise as jurors that they will dispel every reasonable doubt as to every element and prove beyond hesitation that Mr. King is a murderer and that he murdered that child. I talked about beyond a reasonable doubt. This is a term of art also, as Judge Zahner is going to define it for you. But a reasonable doubt, and he will tell you, I know you all pay attention to the charges, he can tell you that a reasonable doubt is the kind of doubt that would cause a person to hesitate to act in the course of their own most important affairs. And in any criminal trial, the juror has...
So Mr. Loy taking the tact you would expect him to take as the, I'll call him, lesser defendant in the case. Catherine Lizardo and Joe Richardson. So Catherine, it makes sense to me that he's doing what he has to distance himself. Like, I'm not the dad, I'm just the boyfriend.
Yes, and that's what we were talking about before we saw that closing, which is he's trying to say that my client, Larry King, did not have any duty to Cristina, but that makes it difficult for the jury to separate the fact that that's just an abomination in terms of a lack of human remorse for this child, especially since, as I mentioned, she was on his property, even though inside Rita Pangalangan's car. And also, he was the one who carried her from his house to the car and closed the door behind them, where she then suffered and burned to death for hours. So that will be very difficult for the jurors to set that aside.
Joe, let me ask you, if you've got co-counsel and you definitely have conflicting interest on some level, how do you decide who's going first for the closing argument? You flipping a coin? What's the deal? Arm wrestling for it? What's the deal?
Yeah, I mean, hopefully you have enough of enough unity, for lack of a better word, with counsel where they know that they're better off. Hey, if I was the gentleman's counsel, King's counsel, I would, and I believe that I was no worse off going first or second. I might give them the choice because she's the one with the biggest problem. You know what I mean? So, hopefully they've spoken reasonably, together, et cetera. I don't think that he's worse off thinking through it. I guess it could be argued either way for him going first or second, because basically he's got the best news. He's the one that can say he's not the dad. He's the one that can say and emphasize the legal standard and say, hey, this might not be the ideal situation where he's morally wrong. You think that something else should have been done and could have been done, but he's not the one in this situation. And so if you want to get someone, you can always get her just by the way he argues it. He doesn't say that specifically, right? But he's got that luxury, and he can say that first or he can say it second.
Yeah, I'm trying to think about it. I don't know if I'd want to go first or second. If I go second, maybe then I get to say he didn't do any of that. You know, he's not the biological parent, so you know, I'm not even sure why I'm here. But you're right. It's a very interesting procedural and tactical decision that has to be made. Let's take a break. We're going to come back. More closing arguments in the case in South Carolina in this death of this poor 13-year-old girl, Cristina. Be right back.